The hum of the Starbound Unity's engines was the only sound that filled the bridge. Captain Jake Morrison stood by the observation window, staring out at the vast blackness of space. He'd been in space long enough to appreciate the beauty of it, the endless stars, the quiet majesty of the cosmos. But today there was something gnawing at him. A tension, a feeling that something was about to change. He couldn't shake it. His science officer, Lisa Park, broke the silence. "Captain, we're receiving an unexpected signal from Sector 7. It's unusual." Jake turned, his heart rate quickening. Sector 7 was a part of space so far from human colonies that it was considered nearly barren. There were no known civilizations in that area. Put it on screen. The signal appeared as a mass of static, broken up by bursts of alien language, none of it making sense. The words were distorted, but there was no mistaking the tone. Desperate. "What is it?" Jake asked, his brow furrowing. "I'm not sure," Lisa replied, her voice tight with worry. "It's not from any known species, but there's something. Urgent about it, something's wrong." The air on the bridge thickened. Jake knew the risks of venturing into uncharted space, but this wasn't the first time he had followed a distress signal to the unknown. It could be a trap, or worse, it could be someone in genuine need of help, and if that was the case, he couldn't turn his back. "Get the coordinates," Jake ordered. "We're going in." Lisa's fingers flew across her console. "Coordinates set. We'll reach the source in 6 hours, Captain." Jake nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. They were far from Earth. Out in the outer rim, beyond the protection of the central colonies, a place where danger lurked in every corner of space. Yet his duty, his belief in humanity, pushed him forward. He'd seen enough destruction in his time as a captain to know that when the galaxy was in trouble, it was up to people like him and his crew to step in. "All hands prepare for an unknown encounter," Jake announced over the intercom. His voice carried through the ship, steady and resolute. "Stay alert." A deep silence followed. The crew was already used to his leadership, but this was different. This wasn't just a distress call. This was something personal, something more than just a standard rescue mission. Hours passed. The Starbound Unity sliced through the black expanse of space. The crew worked quietly, every member focused on their duties. Lisa Park remained at her station, her brow furrowed, analyzing the signal. Her quiet unease mirrored Jake's own. What if they were walking into something they couldn't handle? What if the galaxy was finally showing them its true, unforgiving face? Finally, the silence was broken. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice tight, "the signal. It's coming from an enormous ship, 10 times the size of the Starbound Unity." Jake's stomach dropped. 10 times the size? That was a ship capable of housing thousands. And yet there was something about the energy of the signal, the way it cut through the silence of space, that made Jake feel something far worse than just a dangerous unknown. "Are there survivors?" Jake asked, his throat tight. Lisa tapped her console again. "Yes, but the life signs are strange. They're not human, and there are, far more than I expected, thousands." Jake's mind raced. The possibilities were endless, and none of them seemed safe. They could be walking into a war zone, a trap, or worse, a dying civilization that would do anything to survive. He took a deep breath. He was Captain Jake Morrison, and he wouldn't back down from a challenge. But this wasn't just about courage anymore. This was about something deeper. The ship was now visible on their screens. It was an immense vessel, a labyrinth of jagged shapes and twisted metal. Its surface was pocked with damage, parts of it dark and scarred by what appeared to be long, ancient wounds. The ship wasn't just big, it was a relic of something that had once been great, now dying, a broken shadow of its former self. Jake felt his pulse quicken. "Bring us in closer, Lisa," he ordered, unable to tear his eyes away from the image of the ship. "We need to make contact." The crew worked in unison. Every moment felt like it stretched out, pulling them closer to an unknown fate. The Starbound Unity neared the alien vessel. As they got closer, Jake could see more of the details: broken communication arrays, shattered windows, and strange, lifeless energy signatures. It wasn't just damaged, it was on the brink of collapse. The life signs fluctuated, weak and desperate. Lisa frowned. "There's something wrong with their systems. Their life support is failing." Jake's heart clenched. He had no way of knowing whether the inhabitants were still alive, but if they were in grave danger. He was about to make a decision that could change everything. "Open a comm channel," he ordered. A soft static filled the bridge, and then a voice, deep and raspy, echoed through the comms. It was barely audible, muffled by the chaos of the ship's damaged systems. but Jake caught the words. Help dying, cast out, no home. Jake's chest tightened. This wasn't just a cry for help. This was the voice of someone who had lost everything, someone desperate yet still holding on. Get me a clearer signal, Amy, Jake said, addressing his communications officer. We need to understand them. Amy, young but highly skilled, worked quickly. Her fingers danced over her console, working through the static, piecing together fragments of the message. Then the static softened and clearer words emerged. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human ship Starbound Unity, Jake said clearly, his voice firm. We received your distress signal. Do you need help? A brief silence followed. Then the voice returned, slower, more deliberate. Help dying, cast out, no home. Jake could hear the fear and hopelessness in the alien's voice. They weren't just stranded, they were abandoned. The bridge fell silent as Jake stared at the alien ship on the screen. He had a choice to make, and it weighed heavily on him. Do we help them? Lisa asked softly, almost as if reading his mind. Jake paused, his thoughts racing. The path forward wasn't simple. Humanity had always prided itself on being the saviors, the protectors of the helpless. But was this just a test? A trap? What would the consequences be? Get their location, let's go, Jake said with finality. If they need help, we'll give it. And just like that, they set a course for the unknown. They didn't know who these beings were or what they would find, but Captain Jake Morrison knew one thing for sure. Humanity was about to face a challenge like no other. The Starbound Unity veered closer to the massive, dying vessel. Time was ticking and the tension among the crew thickened. Would they arrive in time? Would they be able to save anyone? And what awaited them on that dying ship? The answer, Jake would soon find out, would shape not just humanity's future, but the entire galaxy. The Starbound Unity crept closer to the massive, dying ship. The lights on the bridge flickered as Lisa worked tirelessly at her console, fine-tuning the navigation system and recalibrating the communication frequencies. The air was thick with anticipation. The crew knew they were approaching the unknown, a place where anything could happen, where they might be walking into a trap, or worse, a complete disaster. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the helm, staring at the hulking shape of the alien vessel, its outline now clear against the backdrop of distant stars. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its design was both elegant and monstrous, a series of curves and sharp edges that spoke to an ancient technology, now long decayed. Parts of the ship were dark, scorched by time, and others glowed faintly as if the life was slowly draining from it. Jake's thoughts turned to the message they had received. Help, dying, cast out, no home. There was a rawness to the voice that haunted him. Someone or something out there was in desperate need. But who were they, and what had driven them to the brink of destruction? Captain, I'm getting another signal, Amy, the communications officer, called out, snapping Jake from his thoughts. Put it on screen, he ordered, his voice firm but tinged with concern. The screen flickered to life. A blurry image appeared, a figure humanoid, but its features were unfamiliar. Its skin shimmered with a greenish hue covered in faint scales. The creature had large, bulbous eyes that seemed to glow faintly, and its body was thin, almost skeletal. Its voice, when it spoke, was rough and strained, but there was an undeniable urgency to it. This is Keth, the alien said, its voice hoarse. I am the leader of the Keth for people. We have been cast out, abandoned by the Galactic Council. We need help. Jake felt his pulse quicken as the alien's words struck him. Keth's people, whoever they were refugees, cast out, exiled. The Galactic Council, the powerful galactic body that controlled most of known space, had abandoned them. Why, and what did that mean for them now? We received your distress signal, Jake said, trying to steady his own nerves. Tell me more, how can we help? The alien leader, Keth, looked at the camera. Our people are dying, our ship is failing, we have no resources, no home, the Council, they call us defective. They say our genes are wrong, that we are not fit for the galaxy, we are not wanted. Jake's heart sank. Defective? Cast out? These weren't just refugees seeking shelter. These were people who had been abandoned because they were different. The weight of the decision that lay ahead pressed down on him. Humanity had always fought against oppression, against the idea of casting people aside because they were different. Was this their chance to prove it? He exchanged a quick glance with Lisa, who looked equally troubled. How many of you are there? Jake asked Keth, his voice calm, though his mind raced with the possibilities. There are 47,312 of us, Keth replied, his voice heavy with sadness. Many are children, some are elderly, all are sick, hungry, dying. We have nowhere to go. No one has offered us sanctuary." The room went silent. 47,000 refugees. That was no small number. But Jake had always believed that humans were capable of more than just survival. They could be the protectors, the ones who stood up for the helpless. Keth's image flickered on the screen. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "We only ask for your compassion. If you do not help, we will die in the void. The council will not help us. But we have heard of your people, humans. We have heard of your kindness, your strength." Jake's heart clenched. Compassion, strength, the very ideals that humanity had been built upon, the very reason he had taken command of the Starbound Unity in the first place. But could they really offer sanctuary to a species that had been cast out by the most powerful force in the galaxy? He didn't know what the consequences would be. He didn't know what the Galactic Council would do, what kind of repercussions there would be for defying their edicts. But he did know one thing: they couldn't turn their back on these people. "Prepare for boarding," Jake said firmly, his voice resolute. "We'll offer them what they need, we'll help them." As the crew of the Starbound Unity moved into position to dock with the alien ship, a new sense of urgency took hold of them. They didn't have all the answers, and they couldn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: this was a turning point. They were about to make a choice that could change everything. Jake stood at the helm, staring at the darkened alien ship, its hull riddled with scars from an unknown war. The Keth for people had been through hell, and they were hanging on by a thread. Humanity's intervention would not just be a rescue mission, it would be a statement, a choice, a declaration that humans would stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. "We're about to step into the unknown," Lisa said quietly, coming to stand next to him. "And we don't know if we'll be welcomed or if we'll be attacked, but I trust you, Jake." Jake gave her a brief nod. "I trust all of you." And with that, the Starbound Unity made its final approach, ready to dock with the alien ship. The Keth for people had asked for help, and humanity was about to answer. As the docking clamps engaged with the alien vessel, the tension on the bridge reached its peak. The crew was ready, but Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of their decision. This wasn't just about saving a few lives. This was about a statement to the galaxy, a statement about what humanity stood for. The air was thick with anticipation. For a moment, everything seemed to pause, and then, with a soft whirring sound, the airlock opened, and the crew was ready to make first contact. Jake took one last deep breath before stepping forward. "Let's go." The doors to the airlock opened, and the crew filed out, stepping into the alien vessel. The moment they crossed the threshold, the magnitude of the situation hit them. The inside of the ship was dark, eerily quiet, and the faint hum of machinery was the only sound that greeted them. But then, from the shadows, they saw them. The Keth, tall, thin, with glowing eyes and green, scaled skin. They looked fragile, malnourished, but there was something else in their eyes: hope. Hope that they had finally found someone who wouldn't turn them away. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady. "We're here to help you. You're safe now." Keth's large eyes widened. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then his voice trembled. You are not like the others." "No," Jake said, his voice firm. "We are not." And as the first steps into the unknown were taken, a new chapter in the galaxy was about to begin. The Starbound Unity crew moved through the eerie, decaying corridors of the alien ship. The hull groaned under the weight of ages, its walls scarred from what Jake could only imagine were countless battles and countless years of neglect. The ship's life support systems had failed, and every step felt like an echo of desperation. The Keth for people moved around them in silence, their hollow eyes watching the humans with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Jake's heart went out to them. These were people who had been cast aside by the galaxy, rejected for reasons they didn't understand. And now, after all they'd been through, they were depending on the crew of the Starbound Unity to help them. There was no turning back now. As they moved deeper into the alien vessel, the crew found what they had feared. The Keth ship was dying. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. The air smelled stale, and the faint hum of the engines was barely audible. Every step they took revealed another part of the ship that had broken down beyond repair. The massive ship, once proud and powerful, was nothing more than a shell of its former self. Dr. Helen Chang, the ship's doctor, stepped forward, her face tight with concern. "Captain, these people, they're in bad shape. Many of them are sick, malnourished. We'll need to set up medical stations immediately." Jake nodded. "Get to work, doctor. We'll help them however we can." The Keth leader, Keth, approached them slowly, his expression still one of deep sorrow. We did not expect this kindness, he said softly, his voice trembling. You are the first to help us, the first to see us for what we are. Jake put a hand on Keth's shoulder. Everyone deserves a chance, Keth, don't give up. Keth looked at him, his large eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. But the others, the Council, they have said that we are defective, that we cannot be a part of their galaxy, that we are a threat. Jake's stomach twisted. He had heard of the Galactic Council's rigid policies, their obsession with genetic purity. It was a cold, clinical view of the galaxy that saw any deviation from the norm as a flaw, a problem to be discarded. But what was happening now, what he was witnessing firsthand, was something different. No one is defective, Jake said firmly, his voice rising with the weight of his own anger. We're all different, Keth, but that doesn't make any of us less valuable. We fight for each other. That's what humanity stands for. Keth's eyes filled with tears, tears of hope, of disbelief. You would risk everything for us? He asked. Jake didn't hesitate. We risk everything for the right thing, for what's right. Back on the starbound Unity, the crew worked tirelessly to make the alien ship habitable. Lisa Park, the ship's science officer, and her team worked on restoring the ship's communication systems. Amy Foster, the communications officer, worked alongside them, piecing together the fragments of broken technology. It wasn't easy, and they were running out of time. The Keth were in dire need of medical attention, and the ship's systems were deteriorating rapidly. The starbound Unity crew wasn't used to working in such primitive conditions. They were skilled, yes, but they were used to human technology. Alien systems were a different beast entirely. Hours stretched into days, and every member of the crew felt the strain. Jake didn't leave the alien ship. He oversaw the repairs, worked with the Keth, and kept morale high. He saw the way the refugees looked at his crew with reverence, but also with disbelief. They couldn't fathom why humans, a species they had heard nothing but bad things about, were offering them sanctuary. Yet Jake never doubted their decision. Humanity had always stood for compassion, for helping those who couldn't help themselves, and now the galaxy would see that. The days passed in a blur of hard work. Dr. Chang's medical team set up makeshift clinics, tending to the sick and the elderly. They treated wounds, offered food, and provided what little comfort they could. The Keth had been through so much that even the smallest act of kindness seemed to mean the world to them. Meanwhile, Lisa and her team continued to repair the ship's systems, working day and night. The communication array was slowly coming back online, but it was clear that they weren't going to be able to make a full recovery in time. There was only so much they could do with the limited resources they had. At the same time, the tension between the refugees and the rest of the starbound Unity crew began to build. Many of the Keth were still wary. They had been abandoned by the galaxy, and now they were being offered shelter by humans. The transition wasn't going to be easy. It was hard to break old habits, especially when you were used to being treated as less than nothing. One evening, Jake stood in the center of the alien ship, watching as the Keth refugees slowly began to settle into their new quarters. The sound of children laughing in the halls filled him with both pride and sadness. They had all been through so much, but now they had a chance to build something new. Captain, Keth said, stepping up beside him, "We owe you everything." Jake turned to him, his expression softening. "You owe us nothing, your family now." Keth smiled, a small, genuine smile. For the first time, Jake saw the weight of the past few days lift from his shoulders. The Keth had been given a chance, and they were taking it. But there was still one thing that weighed heavily on Jake's mind. The Galactic Council, they would find out, they always did. As if on cue, a transmission pinged from the starbound Unity. Lisa's voice came through the comms, tense and urgent. "Captain, you need to see this." Jake's stomach dropped. He hurried to the bridge, where Lisa was already working furiously at the comm station. The screen flickered to life, revealing a stern-faced ambassador, Henry Clark, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council. His voice was clipped, his words sharp. "Captain Morrison, you are to return immediately to Earth space. Your actions have been reported to the Council. They demand an explanation for your unauthorized rescue mission." Jake's heart raced. He knew this was coming. The Galactic Council wouldn't take kindly to this. He didn't know how they would react, but he knew it wouldn't be good. "This is not your decision to make, Ambassador," Jake said, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. "The Keth for people are under our protection now. They need our help." You've made a grave mistake, Captain. The Council has made its decision clear. You will be held accountable for defying their orders. Jake stood there staring at the screen, his mind racing. The Council was coming for them. They weren't going to let this stand. Captain, we're not leaving them behind, Lisa said, her voice quiet but firm. We've made a commitment. Jake nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the screen. He had a choice to make. They could turn back, go back to Earth, and deal with the consequences, or they could keep moving forward, defy the Council, and make a stand for what was right. He looked around at his crew, the faces of the people who had stood by him through thick and thin, and he made his choice. We're not turning back. Prepare for a fight, he said, his voice resolute. We're going to protect the Keth. Jake stood on the bridge of the starbound Unity, staring at the screen. The cold, mechanical voice of Ambassador Henry Clark echoed in the back of his mind. You will be held accountable for defying their orders. The hum of the ship's engines seemed to fade into the background as the weight of his decision settled on his shoulders. The Galactic Council wasn't just a bureaucratic entity. It was a power with teeth, with the authority to make or break civilizations. They could block trade, deny access to technology, or worse, they could declare the starbound Unity an enemy of the galaxy. But Jake had made his choice, and there was no turning back. Captain, we're receiving more transmissions from the Council, Lisa reported, her voice tight. They're warning us. They're sending a fleet. Jake's eyes narrowed. He had known this was coming. A direct confrontation with the Council was inevitable. But what did they really want? To punish him? To make an example of him? Or was there something bigger at play here, something the Council didn't want the galaxy to know? Set course for Earth space, Jake said, his voice calm, but there was a fire burning in his chest. But we're not going to Earth. We're going to find the truth. The Keth for people were still settling in aboard the starbound Unity, trying to adapt to their new reality. Most of them, particularly the children, were frightened but eager to start fresh. They didn't know what would happen next, but the fear in their eyes was slowly being replaced with a sense of hope. They had been given a second chance. But there were still many unanswered questions. The Galactic Council's rejection of the Keth had always been about their genetic makeup. But why? What was so wrong with them? Why had the Council condemned an entire species based on their biology? Jake was determined to find out. Hours later, the starbound Unity was underway, navigating toward the border of Earth space. Jake knew the risks. The Council's fleet was on its way, and they wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who stood in their way. But the starbound Unity wasn't just any ship. It was a symbol of human resilience, of a refusal to back down. And it carried with it not just the hope of humanity, but the lives of 47,312 Keth refugees who had nowhere else to turn. Jake looked at the crew, their faces tired but resolute. We're going to the Galactic Archive, he said, his voice carrying across the bridge. There are answers there. It's the central database for all Council records. If anyone knows why the Keth were abandoned, it'll be there. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You think the Council would just leave that kind of information accessible? Jake grinned. I don't expect them to make it easy, but if we can find the truth, we can stop this. We can prove to the galaxy that the Keth don't deserve to be cast out. The bridge crew looked at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They were going up against a power far greater than themselves. But Jake had always been a man who found strength in adversity, and now, more than ever, he needed to believe in that strength. The journey to the Galactic Archive took them through uncharted sectors, navigating through asteroid fields and nebulae. Jake had instructed the crew to remain vigilant. The Council's fleet was no longer a distant threat. It was growing closer, and soon they would be forced to make a stand. As the starbound Unity closed in on the Galactic Archive, the tension on the ship reached a breaking point. The Keth refugees were now aware of the danger. They had been through so much, and now they were once again being dragged into a conflict they didn't understand. Keth, the leader of the Keth for people, approached Jake on the bridge. Captain, we don't want to cause any more problems. If the Council comes for us, we will leave. We'll go to the farthest corner of the galaxy if we have to. You've already done more for us than anyone ever has. Jake looked at the Keth leader, his face softening. You don't have to leave, Keth. You have a right to be here. You're not just refugees. You're a people with a history, with a future. The galaxy won't understand it at first, but I'm going to make sure they do. Keth nodded, though there was doubt in his eyes. The Keth people had been abandoned for so long. They had learned not to trust anyone, but Jake's resolve gave him a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Captain," Keth said quietly. "We will follow you wherever you go." They arrived at the Galactic Archive, an enormous facility located at the heart of Council space. The building itself was a towering, crystalline structure, its surface reflecting the stars like a diamond. The archive was known to be the most secure place in the galaxy, housing the most sensitive information. Jake knew that getting inside wouldn't be easy. But as they approached, Lisa's voice cut through the silence. "Captain, we're being hailed. It's the Council fleet." Jake cursed under his breath. They were too close now. The Council knew exactly what they were up to. "Put it through," Jake ordered. The screen flickered and the face of Chancellor Cethrin appeared, his features drawn tight with anger. "Captain Morrison, you've gone too far. The Keth for people are a danger. You have no right to defy the Council. If you don't turn back now, we will be forced to take action." Jake didn't flinch. "We're not going anywhere, Chancellor. The Keth have been abandoned, cast aside for something they can't control. I'm going to the Galactic Archive to find the truth. If you want to stop me, you're going to have to fight." Cethrin's eyes burned with fury. "You are making a grave mistake, Captain. You will regret this. The galaxy does not need more outcasts." "Maybe the galaxy doesn't need them," Jake shot back, his voice steady. "But humanity does, and we're not turning our backs on them." With that, he cut the transmission. The crew turned to face him, their expressions tense. The Council was no longer just a bureaucratic body. They were coming for them, and they wouldn't stop until they were either destroyed or forced into submission. But Jake didn't care about the Council anymore. He had made his choice. "We're going to the archive," Jake said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "And when we find the truth, the galaxy will have no choice but to listen." The Starbound Unity approached the Galactic Archive with grim determination. The battle was coming, and Jake knew that what they found in the archive could change the course of galactic history. Behind them, the Council fleet moved closer, its dark ships glinting in the distant stars. The final showdown was about to begin. The Starbound Unity approached the Galactic Archive with a sense of urgency. Jake stood on the bridge, watching the enormous crystalline structure grow larger on the screen, its surface gleaming like a fortress. It was a place of knowledge, power, and secrets, and Jake was about to uncover one that could change everything. Behind them, the Council fleet loomed. Dozens of ships were closing in, their massive forms cutting through the blackness of space like predators tracking their prey. Jake knew they were running out of time. The Starbound Unity was outmatched, outgunned. But they had something the Council couldn't take away, the truth. "Captain, we're almost at the outer perimeter of the Archive's defenses," Lisa said, her voice tight. "There's a security blockade in place. It's going to be hard to get past." Jake's jaw tightened. He had expected as much. The Galactic Archive wasn't just a library of records, it was the backbone of the Council's power. Keeping its secrets safe was a top priority. They would fight tooth and nail to stop anyone from breaching its walls. "We're going in anyway," Jake said, his voice filled with resolve. "Prepare the crew, we'll need to move fast." The Starbound Unity slowed as they reached the outer rings of the Galactic Archive's security zone. Laser beams cut through space like sharp knives, and automated drones patrolled the area, their sensors scanning every inch of the surrounding space. The defenses were designed to repel any threat, but Jake had something that the Council hadn't counted on: the ingenuity and determination of his crew. "Captain, we've been locked onto," Marcus, the security chief, called out. "They're preparing to fire." Jake turned to face his crew. The moment of truth had come. "Take us in," he ordered. "We'll outrun them." Without hesitation, Lisa initiated a series of evasive maneuvers, sending the Starbound Unity diving toward the heart of the Archive's blockade. The ship groaned as it turned and twisted, narrowly avoiding incoming fire. Every jolt made the crew hold their breath, but they didn't falter. The ship's crew was in sync, each person moving with purpose, their focus laser-sharp. The battle outside was fierce, but Jake didn't allow himself to look back. He had to stay focused on the mission at hand. They were close now, closer than he'd ever imagined to unraveling the mystery of the Keth's exile, and he wasn't going to let anything stop him. "Almost there," Lisa called, her fingers flying across the console. "We've bypassed the first layer of security. I'm unlocking the next one." Suddenly, the ship shook violently as an explosion erupted just behind them. The Council fleet had launched a full assault, but Jake didn't flinch. They had to push forward. "All hands brace for impact," Jake shouted. Another barrage of fire hit the starbound Unity, and the ship rocked again, lights flickering. The hull groaned under the strain, but the crew held firm. "We're through the last defense grid," Lisa shouted in triumph. "The archive's access point is just ahead, we're in." Jake didn't waste a moment. Set a course for the central data core. Inside the galactic archive, the air was cool and sterile, the walls lined with holographic screens and data nodes, all silently humming with the power of untold knowledge. The archive was a cathedral of information, a monument to the power of the Galactic Council, and it was here that the secrets of the galaxy were kept. The crew moved quickly but carefully through the archive's grand halls. The walls were lined with millions of records, but Jake had no interest in browsing. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. "Captain," Lisa said, pointing to a terminal at the far end of the room. "That's the core access point. Once we tap into that, we'll have full access to the Council's records." Jake nodded. "Let's move." As they approached the terminal, Jake felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The truth was here, somewhere in this vast database, and once they found it, everything would change. The terminal flickered to life as Lisa connected the starbound Unity's systems to the archive's core. Data began streaming in, and the glow of the screens reflected in her eyes. "I'm in," Lisa said, her voice full of awe. "There's a lot here, some of it's encrypted, but I can work through it." "Focus on the Keth," Jake urged. "We need answers on why they were rejected by the Council." Lisa's fingers flew over the keys. A moment later, a series of files appeared on the screen. One in particular caught her eye. "Here we go," she muttered, her voice low. "The Council's official report on the Keth species. There's something strange about this." She opened the file, and the truth began to unfold. The Council had labeled the Keth as genetically defective, but the file revealed something more sinister. The Keth carried a genetic trait that allowed them to adapt to environments that no other species could. They were resilient to extreme radiation, capable of surviving in space without protection for extended periods. They could terraform barren worlds and colonize areas that others couldn't, but the Council had deemed them a threat to the status quo. They feared what the Keth could do if they gained too much power. So the Council had cast them out, framing their genetic resilience as a defect. But there was more. Hidden within the report were mentions of experiments, genetic manipulation, studies on the Keth's DNA. The Council had been using the Keth as test subjects, modifying their genes to create a more controllable version of them. When the Keth had resisted and rebelled, they were branded as rogue, and their homeworld was destroyed. Jake's heart pounded as he read the report. The Keth weren't defective. They were the victims of a system that feared what they could achieve. The Council had used them and cast them aside when they proved too powerful, too difficult to control. "This is it," Lisa said, her voice shaky. "This is why the Council rejected them, but they weren't defective. They were dangerous to the Council's plans." Jake's mind raced. The implications of this information were enormous. The Council had not only abandoned the Keth, but had actively sought to suppress them. The truth could change everything, but they had no time to revel in it. The Council fleet was closing in, and they were running out of options. "We need to get this to the Keth," Jake said urgently. "They need to know the truth, and we need to take this to the galaxy." Suddenly, the archive's alarms blared, and a voice echoed through the chamber. "Unauthorized access detected. Security forces are en route. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The Council wasn't just going to let them walk out of here. It was now or never. "Prepare to extract," Jake barked. "We're not leaving without the truth." The crew moved quickly, but their time was running out. They had what they came for, now they had to escape. As they raced through the archive's corridors, Jake felt the weight of the decision ahead of him. He had the truth in his hands, but would the galaxy believe it? Would humanity be able to stand up against the Council, or would they be cast out like the Keth? The alarms grew louder as security forces closed in, but Jake didn't stop. They were about to make a stand. The alarms inside the Galactic Archive rang louder with each passing second, the shrill sound echoing through the walls. Jake Morrison's heart pounded in his chest, and the weight of the decision they had made felt heavier than ever. The truth was now in their hands, the truth about the Keth, the truth about the Council's lies. But escaping the archive with that truth was another matter entirely. "Captain, we've got a problem." Marcus, the security chief, yelled from the front of the line as they sprinted through the corridors of the archive. The security forces are locking down all exits. We won't be able to get out the way we came in. Jake's mind raced. They had no choice but to fight their way out, but they were vastly outnumbered. The Council's forces were highly trained, and the Starbound Unity was just one ship, and it was still vulnerable in Council space. "How far to the main docking bay?" Jake asked, his voice sharp and focused. "Not far," Lisa Park answered, looking over her shoulder. "But it's heavily guarded. We'll have to make it through 2 more security zones before we can get there." Jake didn't hesitate. "We'll make it. Everyone stay close." The group moved quickly, using the archive's layout to their advantage. The Keth refugees had been safely secured on the Starbound Unity, and now it was the crew's turn to make sure they didn't get trapped in the archive. The team moved through darkened hallways, the only light coming from the flickering holograms on the walls, which flickered and hummed as they walked by. Every footstep felt like a countdown. Security drones buzzed overhead and armed council troops were closing in. But Jake's crew was prepared. Marcus led the way, with the Keth refugees following close behind, using their natural adaptability to slip past the patrols. Dr. Helen Chang stayed close to the medical supplies, ready to treat anyone injured along the way. As they approached the main docking bay, the sound of heavy boots on the floor grew louder. Jake glanced over his shoulder at Lisa, who was monitoring their progress. "We're almost there. Prepare for a fight." Lisa nodded, her face set in grim determination. "I'll open the door as soon as we're in position." The tension was unbearable, but Jake kept his mind focused on one thing, getting the Keth to safety. Everything else, the Council, the fleet, it didn't matter. Not anymore. They reached the docking bay's access point just as the Council's forces began to close in from the other end of the hallway. The massive steel doors to the bay were still locked, but Jake knew they wouldn't be for long. "Hold up," Jake ordered, signaling the crew to stop. He stepped forward, his hand on the small communication device at his waist. "Lisa, get those doors open, now." The sounds of approaching footsteps grew louder. The Council security forces were nearly on top of them. "I'm working on it," Lisa's voice crackled through the communicator. Jake drew his weapon, his pulse quickening. They didn't have time to wait. He turned to Marcus. "When that door opens, we push through, no matter what." Marcus gave him a nod, his hand resting on his own blaster ready. A moment later, the door to the docking bay slid open with a heavy thud. Lisa's voice came through, a mix of relief and urgency. "It's open, go." Without a second thought, Jake pushed forward, charging into the docking bay. The rest of the crew followed, weapons raised, ready for whatever came next. The docking bay was enormous, filled with the hum of distant machinery and the soft glow of emergency lights. But it was also filled with danger. Dozens of Council soldiers were waiting for them, their weapons trained on the group. There was no escape now. They were trapped. "Stay calm," Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "We're not backing down." The first volley of fire came almost instantly, and the air was filled with the sound of blaster shots. Jake ducked behind a column, returning fire, his movements calculated and precise. Marcus and the rest of the security team followed suit, using the cover to their advantage. The Keth stayed back, watching in silence, their large eyes wide with fear but also with something else, admiration. They had never seen such determination, such strength from anyone before. It was something they had only heard of in whispers, humanity's will to fight for what was right. For every shot fired, Jake's crew fired back, expertly coordinated, working as a single unit. The Council soldiers began to retreat, but it was clear that this was only the beginning. They were outnumbered and they couldn't keep this up for long. "Captain, we've got reinforcements on the way," Marcus shouted, his voice strained. "We need to get to the ship now." Jake's mind raced. They had to move quickly. They couldn't hold this position forever. "Make a break for it," he ordered. "Head to the Starbound Unity." The crew sprinted toward the exit, but as they neared the final stretch, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far side of the bay. More Council troops, this time with heavier weapons, had arrived. "Captain, there's no way we're getting through that line," Marcus called out, his voice filled with frustration. Jake stopped in his tracks, his mind whirling. They were moments away from being surrounded, and the Keth still needed to get to safety. But he wasn't going to let them die here, not after everything they'd been through. Get to the ship, Jake said, his voice now cold and resolute. I'll hold them off. What? Lisa gasped, turning to him. You can't stay behind, Jake. Just go, he said, cutting her off. We don't have time to argue. He wasn't about to ask anyone else to sacrifice themselves. This was his fight, his responsibility. The crew couldn't get trapped here. The Keth had to be saved. And if it came down to it, he would lay down his life to make sure that happened. As his crew sprinted toward the ship, Jake turned to face the incoming council soldiers. He drew his weapon, his hands steady, and prepared for the inevitable. But just as the enemy closed in, a massive roar echoed from the far side of the docking bay. Jake's head snapped up, and his eyes widened in shock. The Keth, the refugees they had fought so hard to save, had made their move. Keth, the leader, stood at the front of a group of Keth warriors. They had gathered their strength in silence, and now they were fighting back. Armed with weapons scavenged from the Starbound Unity, they moved with purpose, their eyes burning with fury. "We are not defective," Keth shouted, his voice ringing through the bay. "We are not your prey." The council soldiers hesitated for a moment, stunned by the sudden appearance of the Keth resistance. It was all the opening the Starbound Unity crew needed. Jake and his team rushed forward, pushing through the gap the Keth had created. The Starbound Unity's engines roared to life as the ship took off, soaring out of the docking bay and into the black void of space. Behind them, the council fleet was in disarray, caught off guard by the Keth's unexpected rebellion. Jake stood at the helm, watching as the stars stretched out in front of them. The truth was out. The Keth were no longer outcasts. They had fought back, and the galaxy would know their story. For the first time, the Keth for people had a chance to thrive, and Jake knew that the fight had only just begun. The stars stretched out before them, vast and endless, as the Starbound Unity soared into the void. Behind them, the council fleet drifted into the distance, disorganized and thrown off by the Keth's rebellion. They had made it out, but Jake knew this victory, while monumental, was only the beginning. The real fight had yet to come. He stood on the bridge, watching as the crew worked in harmony, each member focused on their task. The Keth were no longer just refugees. They were survivors, they were warriors, and for the first time in a long while, they had hope. "Captain," Lisa Park called out, breaking his reverie, "we've received a transmission from Earth Command." Jake sighed, his heart heavy with the weight of their decision. They'd defied the Galactic Council, taken on the full wrath of the most powerful force in the galaxy. But now Earth Command would have to answer for them. Would they support him or condemn him? "Put it through," Jake said, his voice steady. The screen flickered, and President Caroline Swift's face appeared. Her eyes were sharp and her expression unreadable. "Captain Morrison," President Swift began, her voice calm but edged with tension. "Your actions have reached the highest levels of the government. The Galactic Council has formally condemned you and your crew for aiding the Keth refugees. We've received word that the Keth people are now considered enemies of the Council." Jake stood straighter. He knew what this meant. The weight of the Council's power was vast, and they wouldn't let this transgression go unpunished. But President Swift continued, "I've read the reports from your mission, the truth that you uncovered, the story of the Keth. It's disturbing. If what you found is true, the Council's actions are nothing short of a crime. But this will be a difficult road. Earth has fought to join the Council for years. Your actions jeopardize everything." Jake clenched his fists at his sides. The words were clear, but they didn't change the facts. The Keth had been wronged, and they couldn't turn back now. "We're not backing down, President," Jake said, his voice firm. "The Keth have suffered long enough. They need a place to call home, not exile." President Swift nodded, her face unreadable. "I'm not asking you to turn back, Captain, but you need to understand the magnitude of what you've done. The Council won't just let this go. They'll come for us. They'll come for the Keth, and Earth will have to choose whether to stand with you or to bow to the Council." The transmission cut off, and the room fell silent. The crew waited, unsure of what would come next. Jake could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. They had done the right thing, but the consequences of that action were beginning to unfold. They were now on the verge of an intergalactic conflict, a conflict that could change everything. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice breaking the silence, "what do we do now?" Jake turned to face her, his expression resolute. "We do what we've always done. We fight for what's right." Days turned into weeks as the Starbound Unity continued its journey deeper into uncharted space. The Keth had settled in, slowly starting to rebuild their lives aboard the ship. Jake spent hours with their leader, Keth, learning more about their history, their struggles, and their unique abilities. As it turned out, the Keth weren't just survivors of a broken galaxy. They were a species that had adapted, evolved in ways that no other race had. Their ability to survive in extreme environments, radiation, zero gravity, and hostile conditions made them invaluable. But it was this same resilience that had made the Council fear them. The Keth could terraform barren worlds, breathe in atmospheres that would kill most species, and adapt to environments that others couldn't even imagine. Jake's respect for them grew with every conversation he had with Keth. They weren't defective. They were simply different, and that difference was what made them so strong. But as the starbound Unity sailed through the stars, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Council's wrath was inevitable. They would send their fleets. They would try to wipe the Keth from existence, but Jake wasn't going to let that happen. A few weeks later, the crew of the starbound Unity found themselves face to face with an unexpected enemy, a rogue faction of Council ships. They were small, scattered, and out of reach of the main fleet, but they were just as dangerous. The ships emerged from the shadows of a distant nebula, their weapons charged, their intentions clear. They had orders: capture the Keth, bring them back, or destroy them. "Captain," Marcus called from the security station, "we've got ships on our tail. They're closing in fast." Jake turned to face his crew, his gaze steady. "We can't outrun them, we fight." The crew moved into action. The Keth refugees watched from the observation deck, eyes wide with fear. They had seen war, but never like this. Jake knew they couldn't let the Keth see the worst of humanity. They had to prove that this fight was about protecting the future, not fighting the past. The battle was fierce. The starbound Unity was agile, but the rogue Council ships were equipped with advanced weaponry. Laser fire lit up the black expanse of space as both sides clashed, exchanging fire in a deadly dance. Jake barked orders, his voice commanding. The crew responded like clockwork, each person doing their part to keep the ship in the fight. Lisa fired the ship's weapons, directing blasts at the oncoming ships, while Marcus led the charge on the security systems, keeping the hull intact. Amy coordinated communications, jamming the enemy's signals and sending disinformation to confuse them. It wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity and the Keth were stronger together. In the final moments of the fight, as the last of the rogue Council ships fell into the darkness, Jake took a deep breath, staring at the shattered remnants of the fleet. The starbound Unity had survived. The Keth had survived. And for the first time, Jake allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could win this war. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice trembling, "we did it, but they'll be back. We can't keep running forever." Jake nodded. "I know, but we're not just running. We're fighting for something bigger. We're fighting for the future of everyone, human and Keth alike." The crew of the starbound Unity knew what they had to do. The fight for the Keth, for the future of the galaxy, wasn't over. The Council would come for them again, and they would have to be ready. But Jake had learned something valuable in these weeks of uncertainty. The galaxy wasn't as hopeless as it seemed. There were people who would fight for what was right. There were people who would stand up to oppression, no matter the cost. And that was the message Jake would carry to the stars. As the starbound Unity flew toward the distant horizon, the Keth for people stood with him. Together, they would reshape the galaxy. Together, they would prove that diversity, not purity, was the key to strength.